Hello, Nick Barlow here to give my weather discussion for Columbus, Ohio. The forecast period is Tuesday, October 29th, beginning at 6Z through Wednesday, October 30th, ending at 6Z. I'm actually doing this discussion on Sunday, which is about a day early. I'll be traveling for work tomorrow, so this is my opportunity to give a discussion. Shouldn't be an issue. I'll have most of the tools I need to do a good forecast here, other than some of the short-term high-resolution model output. Okay, beginning. I've never been to Columbus, so we'll just kind of take a look at the site and the city. Looks like a major metropolitan area in the Ohio Valley here. The station is located at John Glenn Columbus International Airport. Looks to be sited just east northeast of the urban center, kind of in a suburban area, maybe fair amount of homes and maybe some industry surrounding the airport here. Some small waterways both to the east and west of the airport. Okay, just want to begin kind of get an idea of what's going on at the large scale here. So this is mid-level water vapor output from today. Try and pick out a few features that we might have to focus on for our forecast. Looks like we see a decent upper trough digging into the Great Basin here. A fair amount of mid-level moisture, perhaps some precipitation associated with this feature. I live in the Denver area, and it's cold, and we're getting some snow today, so there is some moisture associated. Downstream over the plains, Midwest Ohio Valley, looks like some drier air, kind of some southwest flow here, likely some ridging at the upper levels. Look at some model output. This is GFS 250 millibar winds. Just get an idea of what the jet stream's doing. So this begins on Tuesday at 6Z. We do see that upper trough over the Rockies here, and fairly strong portion of northern jet upstream from the trough axis. I'll put it in motion here. Some of those higher winds aloft do move into the Ohio Valley. Um, and then we get into the end of the period, 6Z Wednesday. Looks largely unchanged. This trough is still well to the west here, and we do see what looks like some continued ridging along the Atlantic coast there. 500 millibar heights and vorticity. I'll back it up here. So 6Z, we have that broad trough over the Rockies here, and we do see that ridging with southwest flow aloft moving through into Tuesday, uh, into Wednesday here. Not a whole lot changes. We have a fairly tight height gradient here, which would tell me potentially there could be a cold front associated over there, but largely unchanged southwest flow aloft. Look at sea level pressure and 10-meter wind speeds. Beginning on Tuesday here, looks like we have generally light surface winds kind of out of the south here. See some stronger winds and a wind shift here. Tells me that could be associated with a cold front here. Put that in motion. Looks like winds do start to increase a little bit here. We get into the end of the forecast period. A little bit stronger over the Ohio Valley, and also we see the surface winds start to shift out of the north. So maybe we do get some type of a frontal passage during our forecast period. Okay, moving on here. I like to look at just a very broad depiction of precipitation from some models before I, focus too much. Kind of tells me if there's a good chance for precipitation, what have you. So we'll put this in motion here, starting 6Z on Tuesday. GFS really not saying there's a whole lot here, so not expecting a huge precipitation event, but we're certainly going to look a little bit closer as we start focusing in more. Okay, so for the weather challenge, high temperature, low temperature, we look at winds and then we look at precipitation. So I'll start with temperature here. This is 850 millibar level frontogenesis and temperature advection. So primarily just looking at temperature advection here depicted by the NAM model. Beginning 6Z Tuesday, we have those southwest winds moving forward in time. Looks like a little bit of warm air advection out of the southwest. And upstream, again, we see what does look like that frontal feature there with some strong cold air advection and some frontogenesis as well. Prefrontal conditions over Columbus could lead to a pretty warm day there, maybe even above average would be my guess. Moving through time, um, get into Tuesday afternoon and evening. Do see a little bit of cold advection perhaps, but also some warmer air moving up from the southwest here too. So Tells me we need to pay attention to perhaps a frontal passage, but not really expecting a huge increase or decrease in temperatures. One thing also to consider with temperatures is cloud cover for sure. So if we have more than expected cloud cover or overcast conditions during the day, that could certainly hold our daytime temperatures down. Well, in the evening, an overcast sky can lead to warmer overnight lows. So this is let's see, cloud fraction percent from the NAM. We do see a pretty broad shield of clouds over all of the region really here, moving through time. That continues into Tuesday, and perhaps a few breaks in the cloud cover, but certainly a fair amount throughout the region still. So definitely going to keep that in the back of my mind when I'm doing my temperature forecast. Okay, we'll look a little bit further at some temperature guidance here. Start with the NAM model at 6Z on Tuesday. Um, Concerning high temperatures here, move through to about 18Z. It looks to be near the peak where the high temperature would probably be recorded. We're seeing mid low 50s with some 60s to the southeast there. Compare that with the GFS. GFS 18Z on Tuesday, much warmer. We see mid, maybe some upper 60s with 70s to the southeast. So quite a difference between the two models here. They both show a gradient in surface temperatures, again, probably associated with some type of a frontal boundary, but the GFS is much warmer. Look at some model soundings from the two sources here. Um, Pretty dry atmosphere in the mid and upper levels, but we do see some low-level moisture here, but by no means saturated, according to the GFS. Compare that with the NAM at the same time. This is for 18Z Tuesday. It's got better low-level moisture, nearly saturated there, so perhaps some low-level clouds, maybe even some drizzle. Can't rule it out. We put it in motion a little bit, and that low-level moisture stays entrenched there. So that could be one of the reasons the NAM is quite a bit cooler than the GFS. Meteogram generator here. This compares output from a few runs of the NAM and the GFS. We look at our high temperatures on Tuesday. There's a pretty significant spread in the guidance here. So that tells me that perhaps the high temperature during this period is going to be one of the main challenges and one of the bigger sources of error for forecasters. Look at the NAM, or I'm sorry, the MOS output for both the GFS and the NAM. Um, High temperature of 68 versus 60. That aligns with what we saw in those other maps here. So high temperature is going to be a little bit of a struggle at this range to predict. See what the Weather Service does here. Looks like they have a high of 67. So kind of leaning towards the GFS, but maybe a blend of the two, which is sometimes the case. Okay, then we look at the low temperatures here. One thing to always consider with the weather challenges is your low temperature going to occur at the beginning of your period during that overnight or at the end. Um, so you need to kind of look at temperatures and certainly what may change during those two overnight periods when the low would be recorded. So put it in motion here, looking at our temperature of action. And I don't see a whole lot of temperature vection as mentioned. Looking at the low temperatures, according to the NAM here, low to mid 40s to begin the period. And then we get into that second overnight period by 6Z, looks a bit warmer here. So maybe our overnight low might be experienced during that first initial period. Look at the GFS, upper 40s, that initial overnight period, and then kind of mid to upper 40s. So we have to look closer. They may be close, but one of them will likely probably be colder than the other. Okay, moving on to wind speeds here. Um, GFS output beginning 6Z Tuesday. Generally light winds, but they do look like they increase into the afternoon here, Tuesday afternoon, and then into Tuesday evening. And we do see that wind shift out of the northwest with a perceived frontal boundary moving through. Compare that to the NAM moving into Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening. We see the surface wind speeds increase slightly. And then towards the end of the forecast period, we notice that wind shift starting to push into Ohio. Okay, back to the meteogram, looking at our surface winds here for Columbus. There is a decent spread in all of these sources here, but again, the winds do not look overly strong. Generally 10 miles an hour or less. But would like to probably look at maybe some RAP or HRR output tomorrow, if I was able to pinpoint some of that with better resolution. Look at wind speeds based on the Moss. We see these wind speeds generally less than 10 knots according to the GFS. And then we go down to the NAM here. It has a similar idea of what's going to occur, generally light wind speeds here. Okay, moving on to precipitation. Um, have a look at what the NAM thinks about that. This is accumulated precip beginning at 6E Tuesday, moving into 6E Wednesday. You see it does generate a little bit of QPF here. Very light, but it is picking up on something. You remember we looked back at the model sounding. It had the NAM showed better low-level moisture. So perhaps seeing some drizzle, even maybe some light isolated showers, something like that. I didn't see any convective instability on those soundings, and that frontal boundary looked further west for any large-scale forcing, but the NAM paints a little bit of precip in there. Have a look at the GFS for the period. Um, Back it up a little here. Okay, 6 Tuesday, largely dry. It picks up on a little bit, but the NAM certainly has a little bit more over the Columbus area. The Weather Service, their grids don't show any precipitation until the end of after this forecast period's over. So they're not predicting any precip. Look at the reflectivity from the NAM. That does show a little bit of precip during this period. Just some very small pockets of light reflectivity. Again, not expecting thunderstorms, but that could be associated with a little bit of drizzle, a low cloud deck, something like that. Look at our mass output for precipitation, and we see, look at the probability of precipitation. It's very low according to GFS. It does pick up a little bit at the very end of the forecast period, but generally, 5% or less chance. We go down to the NAM, and there is a little bit better chance. It goes above 10% for a while here. So the NAM, certainly the wetter solution, but not a major precipitation event, and could very well end up dry, but I'd like to look a little bit closer before I give my guess on that precip output. And finally, look at the meteogram generator to just compare for precipitation. You see some of these sources painting just a tiny bit of precipitation, and that aligns with some of the output we saw on the maps. So need to consider maybe putting a little bit of precip um, in your prediction if you believe the NAM and you're confident that could occur, or maybe you go with a dry forecast. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for joining me, and hope everyone has a nice week. Thanks.